Jamie Bartlett, a social media analyst who wrote The Darknet Inside the Digital Underworld, did a TED Talk in which he argued that the internet has evolved based on the way it is used in the fringes. So from the military to the academic to the public to the social, and then he argues to the dark. What he's saying is that the way in which the darknet functions, the anonymity, and yes, the bold creativity, inequity, the audacity of political dissidents living under authoritarians, these things which characterize what we currently understand as this dark space, will ultimately become the norm for the way we use the World Wide Web, and that is in fact a microcosm of the way a civilization changes. We are creative, subversive, nomadic, and rebellious. It is what has kept human beings alive, and more importantly, human, through the millennia. I turn to Japan, a country we all like to think we understand. But the Japan of anime, manga, lo-fi hip-hop, Nintendo, and Final Fantasy is not the totality of a complex, and in reality, very troubled society. Being troubled isn't a bad thing. It means you're working through things, trying to understand your identity, trying to become the best version of yourself. The Japan we love so much and think we know, the blaring neon lights, the mastery over the art of storytelling, across media, the artistic dissidence and progressive narratives derive themselves from a very deep, eclectic, and iridescent darkness, once walled off and scorned by a strict social order. But that's just it, you see. The more human beings are subjugated, the more they resist, and the more extraordinary their creations become. Like honeybee, or flowers made of fire, blooming in the deep, starless night. First, let me give you some context. Some of you will know that Japan has a royal family, an emperor and an empress, and so on. Now, the status of that royal family has changed relatively frequently over the space of 200 years or so. Currently, they are symbolic, or perhaps for lack of better language, constitutional. This is in sharp contrast to Hirohito's position as a deity and thus the justification behind the Second World War. Well, how did we get there? The Meiji Restoration, though the term better suited is perhaps rebellion or revolution, a movement ending with victory in 1867, during which Emperor Meiji took back de facto and de jure dominance of Japan from the Tokugawa shogunate, overthrowing the samurai order, popularized and romantically misrepresented today. Meiji sought to prepare Japan for the 20th century and to fight the industrialized global powers that it ultimately would end up fighting. But Japan would become no more free in its people's modes of expression until the fall of fascism, midway through the 1900s. Like the imperial state, the Tokugawa samurai order before the Meiji Revolution was deeply oppressive. Despite what some anime today may overtly imply, there's very little that's cool about a warlord-based fiefdom with a monopoly on violence. The military state enforced a super-incumbent caste system, at the bottom of which lay the merchants, and ironically, the creative businesses which were viewed as superfluous, if not abhorrent by the samurai order. So what did the shoguns do? Did they simply completely ban the arts? Theater, painting, storytelling? I wonder if they could have. Creativity is interesting in the sense that it seems to survive and struggle even in the most dire and oppressive of situations. Mind you, that is different from it flourishing. Can art really simply be suffocated? Or is it the voice which represents human resistance, both conscious and unconscious, both active and passive? In short, people make stuff. That's what we are. This, perhaps more than any other reason, was why the Tokugawa did what they did. The shoguns confined artists to a space known as the pleasure quarter, popularized in media today as a kind of red light district. By confining the arts and all activities they deemed beneath them to the walled-off space, they both quarantined and stigmatized them. Creativity was pushed to the fringes, into the dead of night, where it would surely dissipate. That is not, however, what happened. On the contrary, significant artistic innovations were made in the pleasure quarter. The marginalized merchants turned to these dark spots in Japan to invest and trade in a deep darkness that a fiery flower would bloom. Japan, though not hegemonic in its religious culture, had been, over the centuries, heavily influenced by Buddhism, and therein lie the concept of ukiyo-e, or transience. The pleasures of the heart and the flesh, which people enjoyed in these spaces, was captured in the concept of mortality, that things pass, like the scattering of cherry blossoms or fading of fireworks. Things come and they go, they start and they pass. And though that is the particular sadness of living in the human moment of samsara, or the reincarnation wheel of life, therein also lies the beauty of life, that it is limited, and thereby sanctified. The patrons and artists of the pleasure quarter would take ownership of this term, and the idea of ukiyo as transience became ukiyo as ethereal, ukiyo as floating, ukiyo-e, art of the floating world. Analysts and academics turn to this etymology and argue that ukiyo-e was trying to capture the artistic and hedonistic lifestyle in these spaces, but I argue that's an oversimplification. These spaces of kabuki theater, rakugo storytelling, escorts, artisans, and painters, and all their transience represented something far more primordial, something darker and more amazing. That is, expressions of the mystery of a mortal life, which, filled with both pleasures and horrors, was condemned to the dark. The act of living, in contrast to our Western materialist sensibilities, really living, is a matter of engaging with the ethereal, the floating, or the otherworldly nature of, well, the world. Enter Hokusai, an artist who, if you haven't heard of, it's okay, you've heard of him now, and you've definitely seen his work. His effervescent ocean waves and dreamlike landscapes and bottomless skies are populated by dragons, ghosts, and yokai. Now, what is a yokai? Kami are simplified as Japanese gods and deities, but more accurately, they are beings, concepts, or phenomena which are revered. This is in contrast to yokai, or monsters, which are not worshipped but feared, yet in their frightening visages they are expressions of the true mysteries of the world. The darkness in all its beauty and savagery, their grimacing snouts and wide eyes, from Oni to Umibozu, represent the true, strange, uncontrollable, and thus transient nature of our floating world, in contrast to the eternal, controllable, and safe Kami. I recommend watching Miss Hokusai, an anime film which charts a moment in the life of Hokusai's daughter, which blurs the lines between the mysteries of the human mind, suffering and joy, and the realms of the yokai. In effect, this isn't hyperbole, in terms of art, not abstract nor non-objective, but in a way is real. This is ukiyo-e, what would become known as manga. Hokusai's ukiyo-e were some of the first works in Japan to refer to as manga, or whimsical works, ironically so. This is the legacy of both anime and manga, an art which came from the fringes, rejected and shunned, yet profoundly real in its portrayal of the unreal. Now we turn to Eiichiro Oda, the author and artist behind the world of One Piece, an ongoing manga and anime series now spanning 20 years. Look at Oda's panels and compare them to Hokusai's ukiyo-e. Whether intended or not, they both utilize a sense of simplicity to express the vast and unknowable. Simple lines and shapes confine, within the confines of the panels themselves, vast ideas of terrifying and amazing countries, creatures, and people. Had either artist either directly used realism, abstract, or non-objective art to tell their stories, they would simply be telling us the secrets of their worlds. But rather through minimalism, they utilize the concept of Yugen, the idea that the world is vaster than what we can currently perceive. It is the sense of wonder found in exploring a dusty path in the countryside, or setting up a secret base as a child. A very poignant sensation for Japanese living in an isolated country on the fringes of the world, investing themselves further into the fringes still, to try and comprehend the world out there somewhere. Let's take a look at Oda's narrative. On the one side, you have the world governments and their marines, who seek to make the vast world and its diverse lands controllable and safe. This is the claim to legitimacy that they have, that they make the world understandable by homogenizing culture and authority and suppressing the world's history and all those who would search for it. And on the other side, you have pirates, amoral perhaps in a traditional sense, but look at them. They travel the world in search of the One Piece, a treasure the nature of which they cannot hope to guess, discovering bizarre nations, extraordinary cultures, cities in the sky and below the sea, a plethora of unutterable wonders that the world government seeks to tame. And herein lies the conflict at the core of the story. One viewer, a marine, looks at the world and sees a world of horrors that must be put under control, whilst a young pirate like Luffy, our protagonist, sees endless possibility. In each monster, he sees a person. In each country, he abandons his expectations. Whilst the government enslaves those they perceive as different, whilst everyone else is a passive citizen, in contrast to Luffy, who perpetually looks at each creature and their flaws, be they human, merman, mink, giant, or something he hasn't even heard of yet, as a potential new nakama, a dear friend or comrade in life. Oda instills a sense of sonder in readers and viewers, the sensation that each passing face, no matter what it may look like, has a life as complex, nuanced, and lived in as our own. You won't see this on the NHK, the Japanese state media, but Japan, like much of the world, is engaging in a visceral discourse on whether otherness is to be embraced or feared and rejected. Anti-fascist protesters clash with hyper-nationalists over Japan's soul, whether Japan is the shogunate or imperialist culture of the past, or whether it is a country of iridescence and fireworks, where mysteries, dreams, and love can thrive. A struggle going back to the subjugated artists of Hokusai's era, pushed into the fringes. But democracy has enabled the opportunity to mainstream these eclectic, diverse, and innovative fringes. Perhaps it is that opportunity that whoever becomes the Pirate King in Luffy's world will afford their civilization. I mentioned earlier how a world government, marine, or a free pirate gazing at the world will interpret it differently. Now let's do this exercise. Let's look at an ukiyo-e by Hokusai and see what you see. I'll give you a moment. Well, now, there is no right answer, and though I may have made an argument that might feel binary, there is a lot more going on here. Anime and manga are part of a cosmology, which first found expression in Hokusai's woodprints. The art of ukiyo-e is not a matter of telling a whole story, but rather glimpsing one. Hokusai and his contemporaries challenge us to explore the worlds in their drawings, which are in effect expressions of the same distant world, their wide shots implying a great deal to discover, their busy residents implying civilization, yokai implying the unknowable. Each time you watch a quality anime or manga, you are glimpsing back into the same unnamed world of confounded mystery through someone else's eyes. But with each manga we read and each anime we watch, somehow that world only becomes more obscure. If you are searching for consistency, you may not find it. Search instead for things you don't know, things you don't understand. Particularly in the West, we have interpreted our world as a single planet in an empirical space, but we forget that the world is literally as infinite as the black sky, expanding infinitely with stars among which we are one, ever evolving as expressions of a dreamy universe. The world is mystery, and the search for answers without answers is a way of life, so that we can open our hearts to difference and discoveries, knowing in the back of our minds that the legendary treasure of One Piece is still real somewhere, out there, in the dark. I'd like to give a huge shout out to our current patrons, that's Pierre and Jazz. Thank you guys so much. And if you would like to see more of this kind of content, or just creative content in general, focused around the art of storytelling, then do consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/astories. And otherwise, just like and subscribe, and that would help a great deal.